Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Prevent Child Abuse America. For those of you who don't know me, thank you for joining us today for this next session in our Zooming Out speaker series. We have curated this Zooming Out series to help us all better understand the context and the environments that influence our work. And together discover ways to adapt based on what we are learning. As most of you know, over the past 3 years, PCA America has used an adaptive strategy process to create the theory of change for primary prevention in the US. We specifically chose the adaptive strategy approach because it allows us to be flexible, nimble, and responsive to the ever-changing world around us. Our process was intentional, and it was grounded in research and evidence. We engaged nearly 1,700 individuals across the country, including parents and families, national office staff, Healthy Families America and state chapter staff, key partners. And using the rapid cycle feedback approach, after each session, we adapted and updated the theory of change based on the insight that was shared. Just as the adaptive strategy process disrupts the traditional strategic planning approach, adaptive leadership is a fundamental paradigm shift from leadership as an individual responsibility to one of a social collective process. It really emphasizes the importance of adaptation in a complex and rapidly changing environment, which we all live and work in, and something that we need to embrace. And learn how to navigate so that our work continues to be relevant in today's world. Propelling the field of primary prevention forward requires us to be flexible and adaptable, to deeply partner with one another, to challenge long-held beliefs about leadership, to experiment and rapidly test new ideas, to measure progress in real time, and change as needed to address the environment and ever-evolving world around us. In our last Zooming Out session, if you were with us, on systems change, Mark Kabaj and Aaron Watson underscored the critical role of adaptive leadership in driving innovation and lasting change, and in really implementing and moving our theory of change forward. So today, we will explore the core concepts of adaptive leadership, practical tips for implementing the framework at both individual and team levels, and strategies for integrating additional leadership and transformational approaches. We'll also have some conversations about implementation, about the theory of change, and other things that we can do to inform initiatives on both the national and local levels. So I'm incredibly excited, and we're thrilled to have Peter Watson with us today to share his wisdom, knowledge, and vast experience in the child welfare space, using and thinking about the adaptive leadership philosophy. Peter Watson is currently the Senior Director in the Technical Assistance Unit at Casey Family Programs. He has more than 30 years of experience in child welfare administration, research, leadership development, and systems change initiatives. He's engaged in a variety of technical assistance and systems change work at Casey, including managing and facilitating national meetings and transformation efforts, such as the Family First Learning Collaborative and the Thriving Families, Safer Children movement, which we are honored to partner with Peter on. Peter, we're so grateful for your partnership. We're so grateful for our partnership with Casey Family Programs. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jen. I want to thank Jennifer and Kirsten for asking me to be here today. And I wanted to start off by telling you what I'm not, because I think that's important. I'm not a leadership guru or an adaptive leadership consultant who goes around and teaches people all things adaptive leadership. I've spent a good amount of time over the years trying to think about what the elements of adaptive leadership are and trying to apply them to some of the the work that I've done, my own work, and then working with organizations like yours that focus on children and families. So my idea for today was to try to share my understanding of some of the main elements around adaptive leadership and adaptive challenges, let you know what that means to me and how it's informed my work and my understanding of people and systems. And then as I've been thinking about this, it's been kind of fun because I've realized, oh, I learned about adaptive leadership a long time ago, first when I was in graduate school, and then when I was running another organization and actually did do some work with child welfare systems on it. But there have been other things that have impacted the way I think about leadership and trying to facilitate transformational change that I think relate quite well, even though I hadn't put that together. So I'll try to sprinkle in some of those realizations as well today. And my goal really is to hopefully give you enough information so that you can maybe try out some new things in your own work, think about the challenges you want or need to address, and maybe consider some new ways of exercising leadership, working with your own teams, working with your own communities. So that's my goal today, is really share with you my experience and some of the things that I know. And I should say, as Jen mentioned, working with the Thriving Families Safe for Children effort in particular, I've worked with some different folks from state and local chapters in PCA. So I'm looking forward maybe for some of that work and some of the interactions we've had, we can bring those into the conversation. So I've oriented this around trying to do that, sharing and learning. I've asked Jen and Kirsten to keep an eye on the chat. So if you have things that you want to raise, if you want to interrupt me, if this is bringing up issues and questions, please jump in. I'll try to step back periodically as well and just say, ask for questions and see if there's other questions or comments that you have throughout. So that's my goal, and hopefully that'll be helpful to all of you. So let me just get into this, I guess, and give you a little bit of background. I think as I'm going to try to explain, after years of doing work with different organizations, I don't put a lot of stock into the term leader anymore, like leader is a noun, because I think that implies that there are people out there who innately understand how to lead while the rest of us don't. There are people out there who are just great leaders, and those are the people that you need to be running your organization or running different change efforts. And if you don't have them, you're going to struggle. I have no doubt that there are plenty of people out there who do have innate, what I would think of as leadership abilities for some situations. But I don't think there's enough of them out there, myself included, to address the multiple challenges we face in our world, let alone in the space that we're all working in, thinking about children and families and prevention and what people need. So why am I interested in this? As Jen said, I've spent roughly 30 years. It's surprising, by the way, when you get to your life and you can say you've spent 30 years doing something. But thinking about different organizations and people, whether it's in child welfare or Prevent Child Abuse America, the community organizations you have who are looking at things more from the prevention side, but trying to figure out how to engage with organizations like yours to improve the lives of children and families. And I think I can say comfortably now that I've worked with thousands of people or interacted with them over the years who are talented and committed, and their goal is to improve the lives of others and make a difference. And they care deeply about their work and their purpose, just like my assumption is most of you do. And despite seeing a lot of successes out there in our efforts to make change, I feel like a common theme that we run into and that I run into is also frustration with unchangeable systems and those other people who don't like change and resist change at all costs. And I think that's a reality, but that kind of frustration can really, I guess, corrode the passion and creativity that a lot of you and a lot of us bring to this work. And so I want to try to think about that and try to find ways to address those of us who might start feeling trapped in larger systems wherever we sit, and however much authority we might have in a formal way, we can all still be prone to that frustration. So that's what I'm trying to get at today, is beyond looking for talented, strong, inspiring leaders, it's more than just the luck of the draw. And so I think what I've learned through doing a lot of work with people like you and observing and doing my best to coach and bringing humility, my own humility to the work, and then practicing a lot, is that leadership, there really is a set of learnable skills that we can practice, that we can apply to difficult challenges, the intractable challenges that can be really frustrating when we're not even sure how to go out and deal with them on our own. And so part of this is the need, and this will come up over and over again today, it's the need to look within ourselves, look within our own organizations, look within our communities, and try to find solutions to these hard challenges. And so really what the need is from my perspective is we need to learn how to exercise leadership, exercising leadership, putting it in verb form if we want to have an impact. And that's going to be a common theme that I want to talk about today. So what I want to do is try to share some big ideas with you that relate to adaptive leadership so we can get clearer on what that is, and then think about how we can address those different types of challenges. So let me stop there and make sure I don't see anything in the chat, but anyone have any questions about that? I'm looking at the numbers. Anybody just dropping off saying that's ridiculous, that's not what I wanted when I came on here today. But this is about you. Like you're going to either be able to use some of this or not, and I'll do my best to guide you. But seriously, if there are things that are striking you in a weird way, jump in and ask them. And I often say this when I'm in front of people, not virtually, but it applies here too. If you've got something in the back of your mind, if you're having a conversation with yourself while this is going on, get that out in the open, share that with the rest of us. Those are the things that probably are important around your experience or what you're trying to do, or what PCA America and your chapters are trying to do in this work. So I really invite you to bring those into the conversation at any time today. So let's start. As a starting point, I want to just talk about the two types of challenges that I think organizations and people, we in our own lives face. And you won't be surprised, because we're talking about adaptive work here, that I'm going to distinguish between technical challenges and adaptive challenges. So let me just take a shot at telling you the way that I think about those. So technical challenges are, by definition, relatively easy to define, and they can be solved using the knowledge that we have and the capacity that we have, right? So those people who are involved know where to get the information they need to understand the challenge, and they know who to call for expertise on looking at the challenge. And basically, from an organizational perspective, people who have authority can use that authority and the skills they have to manage these challenges and overcome them. So it's known, we can handle it. You can usually, with your authority, and engage with your team and solve the problem. That's the like very basic definition, I would say, of technical challenges. Adaptive challenges are more difficult to define, and they're going to require some sort of new learning, shared ownership among staff, stakeholders, people in the community, and this is a big one, potentially some sort of loss that people are going to experience as the system that we currently understand changes in order to address that challenge. And again, I'll come back to that, but that's a key part of it. So these types of challenges really require change at the core of what people are doing, whether in your organization or community. Change at the way people are feeling and thinking about what they're doing and how they're doing the work. So put another way, these require some sort of adaptation to overcome, which is why Ron Heifetz framed this as adaptive challenges in the first place. So I get it. Those are, there's a lot of words there, technical and adaptive. So let me give you a couple of examples that might help us think about what this means, or what examples of this would be. So say you have an accident and you break your arm, or you're pretty sure your arm is broken. What are you going to do if your arm is broken? Anyone want to throw something out? Or throw it in the chat?
Get an x-ray.
Yep. Go to the hospital, find a doctor and have her fix it for you, right? It doesn't feel good, it hurts, but a broken arm is a pretty straightforward issue based on our current knowledge. You know where to go to get it fixed. You can go to a doctor, the doctor can fix it. If your doctor, if she somehow says, oh, I want to experiment with this new untested approach on setting your arm, are you up for that? Most of us are probably going to say, no, let's just treat it the way we know how to treat it and get it taken care of, right? So that's kind of a classic technical, we know how to do it, let's take care of it. What do you do if your, second example, what do you do if your 80-year-old father breaks his arm? You still take him to the hospital, right? And in theory, they can still fix his arm. Maybe it takes longer to heal because older people in their 80s have maybe more complications. But the real issue comes when you look at it and you say, what if he broke his arm trying to do something that he's really not physically able to do reliably anymore? How do you handle that? Can you just order him to stop? Can you use your authority as now can I use my authority as the son in the family, the oldest son, to tell my dad, don't do that anymore? It opens up all kinds of other issues within, I'll just say within my family. I have a father who's 82 who's living on his own. So this is not purely theoretical for me. It raises all kinds of issues around life, family. The challenge is a lot more complex. Raised issues about aging, independence, authority within the family, issues I'm really not, and again, I'll use my statement, I'm not so confident about addressing right now. So that I could try to say, don't do that anymore and get the arm fixed at the doctor and say, okay, we're good because I know how to solve that problem. But the odds are something's going to happen in about a couple of weeks that's going to raise those other more complex adaptive issues. And if I think I'm going to handle it by just fixing the broken arm with a doctor, I'm probably misguided. And so the point I'm trying to raise in distinguishing the two types of problems is that some problems can be managed or even commanded away by people with authority, people in systems, people in organizations, like many of you, I'm assuming, have some authority in your organizations. And if you knew how to solve these types of problems, you would already have solved them. It's more difficult when you don't know how to solve it. And the big secret with a lot of these problems across organizations, let's bring it back to us as organizations, is no one knows how to solve them. Because if we knew how to solve them, we would have already solved them. If there was a recipe, if there was a guidebook, we would have already exchanged it with one another. And so, again, the point I'm trying to raise here is it is something that you're going to have to work with each other, with your teams, in order to try to address these adaptive challenges. And realistically, it's like that second challenge. There's never just a challenge that's purely technical or purely adaptive. Usually there's going to be some elements of both, and you're going to have to sort that out. The big mistake that I think we make as organizations and even as individuals is that we either don't understand that we are facing an adaptive challenge, or we do, but we just try to impose technical solutions that we've used before to make it go away. And that frequently can make things worse, in my experience, where I've seen organizations do it over and over, that we use the kind of same old solutions to address new unexpected problems and challenges, and that can make things worse. And I think, given the way that many of you are working with communities, I think you've probably had some experience with that, where if we raise the expectations in communities that, oh, we've heard you and we're now ready to go forward, but we do the same old things, they're going to see it pretty quickly and be dismayed and unhappy about it very quickly. Another way of putting it is, in organizations, we often fix the arm and hope that that's enough to deal with the other problems later. So let me stop there and just see, is there anything in the chat, Kirsten or Jen, that we should reference?
Peter, there was one comment in the chat that I thought was actually really, really interesting, and I'm curious if you want to spend any time with it. But Amanda, I think, mentioned that she's not sure. She might be stuck in some of her old ways and not know how to adjust to leadership styles for younger staff, where motivation might not be the same or different in the way that in the way they are incentivized, or in the way that older folks like me are used to, right? So this idea that leadership styles over generations, I thought that was interesting. So if you
Yeah.
want to spend any time with that now, or if you're going to spend any time with that later, just wanted to share that.
I think we will have a chance to talk about that, but I think one thing to say is it goes to what I just said, which is exercising leadership in the service of what. So if you're going to define the challenge as our challenge is trying to achieve a certain mission, and I was actually going to turn to the new theory of change, so this might apply, but if the goal is how to enlist people in your organization towards that mission, then you can factor in the different styles of people. But if the goal is just for me to be a better manager, then part of that is also going to be looking at your role in it as well. I think my experience of these issues around generations is that and I'll say we because I'm not of the youngest generation anymore, certainly, is we tend to say, this is what that generation is like, and this is what their issues are and why they're difficult to manage. And it's going to require us to look at ourselves and what our expectations are around engaging with a team and leading organizations in order to get at some of those issues I think that Amanda is bringing up. So that's one thing I'd say is let's be clear on the challenge that we're trying to solve. And as we go through this, let's think about the different ways that that we can engage in this work around adaptive challenges, and then maybe come back to that later and think about where that fits. Because I did want to, well, actually, let me just stop there and just see, Amanda, is there anything else about that you want to raise, or am I totally off base in the way that I responded to that, or just something I can think about as we come back to it? I don't know if you want to come off mute or.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. And I'm definitely looking at like, how can I adapt, but you have things that have to get done. And I'm trying to just have that balance between how can I adjust, and what rules are really rules, or they're just rules because I'm used to them being rules, and
Yep.
what things should we challenge versus what things are actually there because they're good to be there. So it's just really kind of looking at everything, and I just don't know how to relate to some of them. So I don't know how to change, or how to to make a good working environment when you've got this wide gap in this balance, to try to figure out how to make it a happy place for everybody to coincide.
Yep. And actually, you know what that makes me think of, Amanda? I'm glad you raised that. This is a little different, but I do want to be transparent about this. I do think the way I'm talking today more often is geared towards, initially, towards each of you thinking about this as individuals. Like there wasn't really enough time to get to what it means for your team to engage in exercising adaptive leadership, but I'll refer to that later, and that's where we'll get to. But I'm going to ask you all in just a few minutes to think about some of the challenges you have, so you'll have a chance to talk about this a little bit more, and maybe we can come back and see who else has some of those challenges as well. So I'm really glad you raised it. What I did to try to get prepared and understand a little bit more about Prevent Child Abuse America is, and because I was wondering about the types of challenges all of you might be facing, is I tried to look at the new theory of change and think about what challenges those shifts might pose for those of you in some of the local chapters. And so I suspect that call, just one phrase jumped out at me, that the call to transform the primary prevention ecosystem may reveal all kinds of challenges, both intended and unattended, that you all are facing. They're adaptive, they're technical, but in the work you're doing within your organizations and your communities, there's probably expectations that people have, again, within your organizations and in your communities about the way you operate. And this new theory of change probably challenges some of those and is pushing all of you to engage in communities with a different way. One way to try to think about the challenges that you're facing is to pay attention to that kind of classic statement, what keeps you up at night? What is it that at 3 o'clock in the morning you're waking up and thinking about? And my experience again is more often than not, those are the more adaptive ones, because if they were technical and you knew how to deal with them, you would already be doing that. So it's worth paying attention to that. It's worth thinking about what you're facing that you haven't faced before, and looking at the gap between the current reality for you and your organization, and then your aspiration for where your organization needs to go. And that's why I looked at the theory of change and started wondering about where things are. The good news, I think, is that you have incredibly powerful ideas in that theory of change. You have strong vision. You've got support from PCA America in the way that I understand it. And my sense is that a lot of you in the local chapters have built these strong relationships in your communities over the years that you can draw upon. So you've got this strong connection to purpose and commitment and creativity, based on what I understand about you. And I also assume that all of you, or most of you, are involved in this work because you've got this passion to learn and use your talents to make a difference in the lives of children, families, and communities. And those things are huge. And those are what you're going to draw upon. The more difficult news that I feel like I'm bringing to you as the bearer of it is that those advantages, which are huge, are probably not going to be enough in isolation to address and overcome some of the challenges you're going to run up against as you try and shift the way you work and shift the way you work with communities. And I'm not trying to say that in a depressing way. That's what's in my mind as I'm trying to help you think about this stuff in a different way. So I think you're going to run into a number of adaptive challenges as you try to work towards the different elements of that theory of change, and even some of the strategies that I see in them, because it's calling upon you all to do work in a different way and involve different people in the work. And by definition, right, that's going to require new learning and engaging with people in a different way. So what I thought we'd do right now is just, before I get into some of the, okay, where do you take this when you start thinking about adaptive and technical, is give you a chance to just talk about, and wait, while I'm doing this, let me pull up just a quick slide here. Not this slide, but there we go. I just wanted to pull that up as we're doing this so you can see that's the language I use with technical and adaptive, because I know I went over that kind of quickly. But what we'd like to do is just put you into random groups of 3 or 4 for literally no more than 10 minutes. So I know what happens here. We do it and then everybody leaves. It's just 10 minutes just for you to talk as PCA professionals about what you think some of the potential adaptive challenges are that you or your teams are facing, or that your organization may be facing. So we're just going to put you into those groups. Let me stop sharing here so we can all see each other. Give you about 10 minutes, no more than 10 minutes to talk about that, and then we'll come back. I just wanted you to maybe have a few of those in mind as we go through the rest of this conversation. So Kirsten, if you want to just put people into those groups, we'll bring you back, and then we'll continue talking here.
Peter, I just wanted to check in. You said don't leave during this break?
Yeah, I said don't leave because, people like to leave every once in a while when we go into small groups. Not in PCA, just everywhere.
All right, I just wanted to check because, all right, thanks.
You better not leave, Takeem. All right. So we'll bring you back soon. Hopefully those were good conversations just to get your thinking going. So, feel free to think about those as we go through this. And actually, no pressure, because some of these you might still be forming, but if anyone wants to share some ideas in the chat of the types of adaptive challenges you're seeing or thinking about, throw them in there, and then we can come back to them later after we go through some more of this. So what I'm going to do, actually, you know what, before I do that, did anything come up in the breakouts around what we've covered so far, the difference between technical and adaptive, that anybody needs me to clarify before I go forward? Okay, we'll throw it in the chat if that's the case, and I'll stop and come back to it. So the next idea I want to share, the second big idea I thought was important, begins to illustrate the difficulty of exercising leadership to address what we've defined as adaptive challenges. And that's it. Your ideas about making progress in that challenge are going to threaten the status quo. Let me say that again. So you might have ideas, but your ideas around, if it's truly an adaptive challenge, your ideas about how to make progress, not even necessarily solve it, but how to make progress, are going to threaten the status quo. And that's whether we're talking about transforming the prevention ecosystem or trying to figure out what I should do about my dad. Those are both systems, and they're both fraught with difficulties and challenges and people with different ideas and opinions. And so what's an example? I had a colleague a while ago who worked in the state of New Mexico. He worked in the child welfare system. He was in the Bernalillo County, which is Albuquerque, and he had recently been hired on the leadership team. So he was part of the leadership team, and he was sitting over essentially investigations. So after child abuse and neglect reports came in, he was over all the investigation units in Bernalillo County, which is a pretty large, impoverished urban area. And shortly after he took over and came in there as the leader, right, he had this scope of authority. He had some ideas about, pretty simple idea about how to maybe improve the effectiveness of the investigations in Albuquerque. And that was to use data to look at and compare caseloads across his different workers and investigators, understand how long it was taking people in different units to complete investigations, look for new solutions, hold people accountable in a different way. And so upper management in the office said, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Go ahead and see what you can do. And so he, in a well-meaning way, posed the idea of using data and looking at caseloads and doing all kinds of new analysis. And what happened? He instantly ran into all kinds of problems and resistance. People compared him to the previous manager who'd been fired. They complained about all sorts of issues. And so what's the message there? Hey, change is great. You go first, right? And maybe we'll follow you, but you do it first. And oh yeah, make sure when you do this change that you don't do anything that impacts the way we do business right now. And by the way, as upper management, find win-wins so everybody stays happy. I mean, in some ways, that was the experience of jumping in there. And so that again gets across that your idea, this is something we're thinking about, no matter how good and logical and even how well funded it is, your idea around something that's adaptive, even if you don't necessarily realize it's adaptive, is going to threaten the status quo. It's going to maybe threaten the existing authority structure and the system people are comfortably operating in every day. And I want to say something about this. A lot of people now throw around the term status quo, and it's used in a pejorative way as if it's some kind of monster that was created to prevent any of us from doing what we know is right and what we should do. And I really do think it's been overused, and there's all these people who are disruptors and I'm against the status quo. But what is the status quo really? It's not really a bad thing. It's the result of a lot of decisions that a lot of people, well-meaning people, have made over time. Many of these people are equally as passionate as you and care about children and families as much as you and all the rest of us. But it's the accumulation of all of these decisions that were probably made individually for a good reason at some point. And the people in the current system, regardless of how much it works, are really, they've invested quite a lot in the current system, right? Even if they're not benefiting from it, they define themselves, they define the way they work, they define the way that they're living according to the way that that current system is organized. And so that includes us as well. So another piece of this, I think one of the keys to doing this work is not only starting to try to understand and identify the adaptive challenge and what the current system is, but we've got to look at ourselves. We've got to look at ourselves honestly. And that's why I said earlier, doing this work with humility and try to figure out what our piece of the mess is, try to understand where we fit in with the current system and how it benefits all of us. And benefit doesn't mean, you know, I'm making money from it, though that could be part of it. Benefiting could just be, hey, I feel comfortable because I come in every day and I know how to do the work. That's huge. That's not a minor thing. And part of this, I wanted to share something with you again. This is one of the kind of updates for me. I don't know if any of you've seen the book, The 4 Pivots by Dr. Sean Ginwright, but this is something I've read in the past couple of years. And I think it fits really well into the way I think about adaptive leadership and adaptive challenges. And so I'll go over some of these later, but the one that relates here, he has 4 pivots that he talks about, but it's the pivot that he refers to as awareness. And he refers to, we need to pivot from the idea of a lens to a mirror and shift from an external focus, meaning looking out at all the problems with the system, and start looking at honest self-reflection in the mirror. What's my role in this? What is my part in this? And I think that fits really well with this piece around adaptive leadership that I'm talking about now, that we've really got to try to understand what the status quo is and understand how the system serves us. And so that's why I'm fond of something. Again, I think some of you may have heard this quote, but a colleague of mine who did a lot of work in adaptive leadership used to say, every system is perfectly aligned to achieve the results it currently gets, right? Every system is set up to do what it's doing right now, whether that's been set up intentionally or not. So the current system from where you sit may seem dysfunctional to you when you have a new idea. It may seem obvious to you that we need to change this, but most people within it are experiencing it as working in a way that at least makes them comfortable. They might even see that it's dysfunctional, but it makes them comfortable. And so they understand how it works. They understand how to function within it. And that's why we say the system right now is in equilibrium. And again, these are not bad people, right? These are people with good intentions. They're just not certain that they should invest in your idea that you're bringing to them around how we need to change it, right? They're not certain of the end result. So again, it's that change is great. You go first and try not to mess up my role right now and what I'm doing and what I'm experiencing from it, right? And so that relates to that idea about resistance, right? Everywhere I go and a lot of work that I've done, there's a lot of frustration, I referred to it earlier, about people resisting change. And this is a really key part of the adaptive leadership framework. So is that true in your experience? Do people just resist change on the face of it? Is that what you all are seeing? I don't know if people want to give me thumbs up. I see some heads nodding. And the question is why though, right? Is it just easier to keep things the same? So I think of things like, is it really that people resist change, right? How many people, what's an example? How many people decline to cash in their $1 million lottery ticket because that'd be too much change for them? Because they resist that type of change. Or why do people voluntarily get married or try to have children, right? Those are massive changes that impact your life in ways that you can't even maybe understand, but that can lead to a lot of stress. So for me, it's like people may not resist change in general, but change when they don't think it's going to be good for them in some way, right? A lottery ticket, you think it's going to be good. Getting married, that's going to be good. Having kids, good. I want to have children. I think we need to shift the frame. People resist the threat of real or perceived loss in some way. Not change, it's the perception, maybe whether it's real or not, but that something is going to happen that I'm going to lose out. And that is, again, not necessarily monetary, not even necessarily my authority, but my comfort, my knowledge, my understanding of how this system works. And so that's tough for what you all are trying to do, because that threat to people is often unspoken and maybe even subconscious. So people might not even understand what that is. And so that really comes to the third big idea related to this. And that is that it's fighting against the status quo, fighting against the system and the way people define it. That's what requires leadership. That's the essence of exercising leadership. When you can see that there's a need for adaptive change, and you can, again, be you as individuals or you as a team, but it's gonna be tough to just argue people out of that, I guess is the point I'm trying to make here. So the key here in fighting against the status quo is that you can't do it usually just by using your authority. So you're going to have to mobilize people who are in the current system to try some different things and make progress on challenges for which there aren't any easy answers. You're going to have to mobilize people who are facing, whether consciously or not, some potential losses, and you're going to have to try to distribute that loss in some way. And so there's this quote that people use around adaptive leadership that I struggled to get under it at first, but one could argue that to do this successfully, adaptive leadership means disappointing people, your people, at a rate that they can absorb. Think about that again. Exercising leadership in an adaptive way.
I know.
I think we got some, someone needs to mute, but is disappointing people at a rate that they can absorb. So did someone have a question about that, or was that just background noise?
I think it was just background, Peter.
Okay. So if you think about that, if leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can absorb in order to solve changes, that sounds pretty different from what I used to think of as leadership. That sounds really different from that charismatic, visionary leadership we hear about a lot, and we see portrayed in books and movies and television. And why is that? To me, and with the adaptive leadership framework, I didn't invent this, but people confuse leadership and authority, right? We hear and read about leaders in different organizations. Hey, you got a new title. Here's your job description. You're now a leader. Congratulations. Here, it says it right here. But we really do confuse authority and leadership in organizations and communities and government. And there is a place for that. You can use authority very effectively, whether you're elected, appointed, hired, but frequently you can use that authority most effectively with technical challenges, at least pure technical challenges. And I think we all know that. We know intuitively that authority doesn't people in authority don't necessarily always exercise leadership or lead in a way that we appreciate. And so leading from a position of authority, but leading it in the way that we're talking about here around adaptive change and interrupting patterns and interrupting systems is surprisingly difficult. It's not one of those things that is intuitive to a lot of us. And that idea of mobilizing people in the face of losses or disappointing people, the big thing there is that's not what people are asking, let's say, us to do as leaders or people with authority. And so I want to make a distinction here. Some people would argue that authority, your authority, is based on three things. And you can categorize authority as coming from giving people a sense of direction, protection, and order, right? And let me explain those. But adaptive leadership runs up against that. So direction, protection, and order. People want you as the leader, if you're the top level leader, to set direction for them and for the organization. They want you to protect them. They want you to give them a sense of clarity around their jobs or roles in the organization. Again, this isn't just organizations where people are being paid. And they want you to give them a sense of order. How does this work? And at any time, if you are pushing against any of those, you can erode the authority that you have, because who gives you authority? The people that you're working with. So let me show you another visual here that might be helpful. Let me just move through these. So take a look at this. This is just a quick visual. Imagine that the circle there where it says using authority, that represents in your job description the prescribed formal authority that you have in your organization or your community organization or your collaborative, whatever it might be. Somewhere, whether it's formal or informal, there's this sense of what your authority is. So in theory, within that circle, if you're acting within that circle, you can do pretty much anything you're authorized to do. And so that's using your authority. It's only as you get towards the outer edge of what your authority is that things start getting a little bit iffy. And I think I would argue, and the adaptive leadership frame argues, that that's when you really start exercising authority. When you are starting to do things that are a little less clear whether you're allowed to do them or whether anyone's thought of doing these things. That boundary there where the red line is and beyond is where you begin to exercise leadership. And what I would say, it doesn't show it here, if you go too far beyond that boundary, you're probably not going to be successful. Someone's going to clamp down on that and say you are not allowed to do that, and you can lose your authority and therefore lose your position. So and you lose your ability to do the type of work that you're wanting to do. And so the idea here is that you in order to do this work effectively, have to figure out where you can push people to change in a way that's going to make them uncomfortable enough to try some things, but not so uncomfortable that they just say no, that they just run into that fight or flight reaction in terms of their organization. So I really wanted to just bring that up because I think that's a key part, that trap of authority, of using your authority versus exercising adaptive leadership and mobilizing people. And so what does this require you to do? It requires you to diagnose what the real challenge is. And to me, most of this is about diagnosing. It's not even about taking action, at least for a long time in the beginning. It's trying to figure out what your place in the system is, what the boundaries of the system are, what people need, what losses they might need to take in order for you to make progress. So where can you start? One place to start, one thing that we use in terms of adaptive leadership, I'm sure many of you have heard this, is this idea of getting up on the balcony. Getting up on the balcony and trying to take a look at what the dynamics are in whatever the system is or the team is that you're working with. So looking at patterns, trying to understand who's involved. Say you're at a meeting. Who's involved at the meeting? What's their place in the current system? Whom do they represent when they're here talking about the system? What are the values that they're bringing? What are their potential losses if we change things in the way that we're considering changing them? Or what are the losses of the people who are engaged in the system that they're trying to work with? And this is not easy to do. So it requires that, another idea here is it requires you to try to figure out what it's going to mean to make progress. And you're really going to have to hold multiple interpretations and possibilities at the same time as you explore them through your interactions with people and trying other strategies. They're just not necessarily things you can ask people. It's not so easy to go, hey, Jen, we're considering doing this changes. What are you going to lose if we do this? People don't even necessarily have an answer, or they're probably reluctant to tell you what the answer is. So it sounds kind of silly, but I've literally done this. Here's something you can try. Next time you're at a meeting with a group and you think there's some sort of maybe an adaptive issue, literally put your chair back like 6 inches and just take a look. It helps me sometimes look at the dynamics. It helps me take more of a balcony view and look at what's going on. The balcony metaphor is if you're on the dance floor dancing, you're surrounded with other dancers. You're probably looking at your partner, but you're not going to see the patterns around the room. You're not going to see who's not dancing. You're not going to see the types of dances people are doing. If you get up on the balcony, you can start seeing different patterns. And that's the goal here. Seeing patterns so that you can understand what's going on and try to get a different perspective. Who's talking a lot and when? Who looks uncomfortable? Who's not talking? When do people in the room seem to feel emotional or uncomfortable or energized, and why? And then you've got to start trying to tease that out and think about what that might mean. This is a little bit different, but it's always helping. When I was young and I was reading my daughter, she was like 3, Goodnight Moon, if any of you, or any kid's book really. And in Goodnight Moon, it starts out with a narrator kind of describing the room. And my daughter one time blew me away. She was 3. And she's like, Daddy, who's talking right now? Right? And I was like, oh, holy shit, I don't know. Like, how do you describe to a 3-year-old who's talking right now? But I started thinking about that, and that is a question worth asking when you are in a meeting, because we over-personalize, just in general. I'll just say we, society, but I think we in human services tend to over-personalize and say, so-and-so is this or that. And let me show you another diagram that I think is helpful. So when you're in a meeting, this is another way that I look at things. Oops, that's the balcony. Let's go beyond that. Imagine you're at a meeting, right? So you're at a meeting with these 4 people and you're working on some sort of challenge. Let's say you're working on some sort of challenge at your local chapter around what it's really going to mean to shift the way you do work. I start thinking, like, when you're at a meeting, you're not just in a meeting with those 4 people, right? Every person at the table, whether consciously or not, is at the table representing a lot of other people. Some people might be there. Someone had a point in the chat earlier about representing young people or people with lived expertise. Some people who have lived expertise, whether you know it or not, might feel like I'm at the table and I'm representing all those people who are impacted by the system. And I'm going to make sure I bring that perspective into the room. Others might be there saying, I'm representing the formal child protection agency because our role is important and we don't want kids to get harmed, and safety at all costs. Whatever it might be, it is worth asking yourself in any meeting, who is talking right now, or who does that person represent? And I've seen at times in some of the work I've done, people who have had realizations along the lines of, oh, you know what? I used to be, that person has really annoyed me for a while, but I used to be in their role. Or if I were in their role, I'd probably be saying exactly the same things they're saying. It is not about them. It's about our system and the way our system is designed and who we're representing. And it's only when you start, I think, getting to that, that you can start, again, to make progress on some of these areas and think about how to engage with people in a different way. And you can do this with your team. Once you start having these conversations with your team and acknowledging the systemic things, there are teams that literally designate someone as, hey, today, Takeem, you're going to be our balcony person. So we're authorizing you throughout this meeting to say, hey, I got a balcony observation for everybody. I don't know what it means, or I have a theory about what it means, but it helps step people back and try to really think about what is going on here and what are we going to have to try to understand in order to do things in a different way. Okay, so the next idea around how you can start to lead with from an adaptive frame is think about ways to give work back to the people who are engaged with you. Let's say your leadership team, to keep it, or your collaborative, whoever it might be. There's going to be a huge pressure, if you are the named leader or one of the leaders, for people in the system to just say, you tell us what to do. And you have to resist that if you want to engage in this work adaptively. You do have to resist that pressure and to define you as the authority figure who can somehow, with your authority, just solve the problem, if you know that it's broader than that. So what does that mean? You've got to try to be clear on what you're trying. You've got to try to push back and give back the questions and the challenges to the people that you're working with, whether that's on a leadership team, people in the community, or others, in order not to solve the problem, but to start coming up with ways to make some progress on it, to come up with things that you can try to change up the dynamic. Because if you try to just solve the overall problem, what did we learn earlier? People are going to feel like they're going to lose something and they're going to probably start resisting. If you can pick off some pieces and learn through changing behavior and then come back and say, how did that work? You can make some progress. And so again, let me give you another kind of weird quote, but if you think about it a little, it can help. You want to help people, including yourself, behave their way into a new way of thinking rather than think their way into a new way of behaving, right? Behave their way into a new way of thinking rather than think their way into a new way of behaving. Translation, you just can't convince people from the force of your will and your smartness to radically alter the way they're living their lives, doing their work. You've got to help them and help each other, try some new things, and then build on that momentum. You've got to take a behavioral approach, or else you're just trying to fix the broken arm, right? That's what you're doing. You're just doing the basics and trying to fix the arm. So let's go back to that colleague I had, Joseph, in Albuquerque. About a year after he had joined that child protection team and tried those new things and basically gotten shut down by all kinds of resistance, he tried some new things. He tried a more adaptive approach with his staff. He brought some people together and had the people from within his unit, child protection investigators and supervisors and some of the workers, and said, we know we have a longstanding problem of pending investigations, right? A really bad thing in child welfare. You got a bunch of reports that you have not done anything about one way or the other. And it's bad whether there's abuse or not, because you're leaving people hanging. And they had like in the thousands of pending investigations. And he basically worked with this group and said, what could we try this one unit of people in order to make some progress here? And what they realized was they wanted to maybe give a try. They had this policy that when a new investigation, a new report came in, equality was the answer. So they had a board literally with all the investigators. And if you had 5 and someone else had 4, the person with 4 was going to get the next investigation, regardless of what their investigations were like, regardless of what the level was. And this unit decided to try, hey, maybe we'll have some people who are more comfortable with the longer term, less urgent investigations. And then there are people who they like the charge of just getting out there for the urgent ones and doing the immediate visits. And they experimented. And they had to give up their vision of equality. And they started making tremendous progress on working down through the pending investigation. They didn't have equal numbers. And over a couple of months, as they expanded out to more units, they reduced the number of pending investigations by 500. They had to give up their idea of fairness, and they wouldn't just go to the wall to see if everything was all fair. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you if you go to Albuquerque that they now have no pending investigations. I don't actually know. This is a while ago. The point here is that Joseph and his team figured out how to mobilize each other in order to do work in a different way. He gave the work back to the group as opposed to saying, hey, I've looked at the data and this is what you have to do. It's just an illustration of how to move forward and engage people in a different way. So a couple of the pivots that I think are important there in Ginwright's work are the pivots around, he talks about pivots of connection, of moving from a transactional style with staff to a more, I'm looking down here to make sure I don't get this right, to a more transformative relationship, right? Building connections with people, appreciating each other's common humanity, and trying to work on some of these challenges together. And the other one is vision. Rather than focusing on problem fixing, pivot towards possibility creating. What are the possibilities that we might try to approach and work on through this work together? So I wanted to raise those again if you go and take a look at that work. So last thing, the last big idea, I feel like I'm going a little bit quick, but I want to at least talk about this and then see if there are questions and comments on how it relates to you, is if you think about this work and you think about all the things I'm describing, progress is not going to feel like a straight line. Right? If you can't just say, here's the problem and here's how exactly to solve it, and if you're pushing up against people's concerns about what they might lose in changes, and if you're trying things and experimenting and coming back and doing things again, you're not going to just be able to have easy metrics and say, we're solving it, we're solving it, we're solving it, despite that example I just gave you about Albuquerque, because you're pushing the boundaries of the way systems work. And there are going to be times when you're going to have maybe stirred up enough disequilibrium and resistance that you're going to have to step back and try something different. So you're going to have to get comfortable with that when you're working at the frontier of where your authority lays. And when you're not sure what it means to move forward other than working together on doing this together. So again, the last pivot that Ginwright talks about is moving from hustle to flow. Moving from this idea that, we have to make progress at all costs and here's how we do it, to more of a flow state of realizing that I need to give that up and I need to engage with people in a different way and work together on this. So the key, I guess, the last thing I'd raise here is this idea of you need to observe what's going on in any given situation, wherever you are. You need to interpret what you're seeing, and maybe you're going to have to hold a couple of interpretations, and then you need to intervene based on those and see how things go. Intervene with others, see what kind of progress you can make, hold multiple interpretations, and try to move forward. And I guess what I want to wrap up and say is hopefully what this gets across is dealing with this type of challenge is more than just coming up with, the beautiful pitch for what the issue is and why everyone should follow you or follow a small group and do what you say. It's engaging and working with people in a different way. It's thinking about what the system is, what some people might have to give up in order for you to make progress. And it's trying to engage in that type of deep change. Again, I'll use that word humility, with humility about yourself and about the system, and with a willingness to listen and engage with the people who are most likely to have some idea about what the challenges are and help you make progress. And sometimes that's within the boundaries of your organization, and sometimes it's much broader in terms of the community and other people that you may need to get involved. So I think I'm just going to stop there because I understand that that's hopefully the progression of the big ideas is helpful, but I know it's not just a, hey, here's the tenets of adaptive leadership, use them if you will. But let me just stop and see whether you either have any questions or observation about that based on either what some of the challenges are that you raised earlier, or the work you're doing, or any other ideas you have. So I'm just going to stop there. And then again, Kirsten, Jen, if anything's come up in the chat, let me know.
I'll jump in. I would just say, Peter, thanks a lot. Very, helpful the way that you laid kind of frame this. I think challenge and opportunity. I think adaptive leadership seems like it's an opportunity, and then it does seem like there's some conditions that kind of make it challenging. But the thing that stands out to me is it seems like, and I was talking about this in our group, it seems like the child protection and family support space is a space that's an adaptive leadership space that it seemed like in the past there was a clear, or what we thought was a clear understanding of what this space was and what the need was. And it seems like as time passed, it's gotten more complex, I would say. And so it does feel like this is the type of leadership that's needed for this space. My question is, how it seems like adaptive leadership is a challenge in and of itself because you don't know how to be prepared in a certain sense, right? But when the adaptive challenge is kind of the entire space, how do you approach that? Because it seems like you're basically fighting against the current, so how do you approach thinking about adaptive leadership when it seems like you're going against basically the entire space? I mean, that's how it feels.
Well, I think to me, it'd be true with anything. You've got to narrow it down to start with, right? You've got to pick off something that you want to engage in your work. And I'm not saying some easy issue, but you've got to somehow focus on something that is adaptive, that you think is a key part of the overall system, and start proving to yourselves and people that you're working with that you can make some progress. You can have some other things in mind that you want to get to, but I know that's not a very satisfying answer to Keem, but I think that's reality. I mean, I'm sure people could come in and name huge challenges, but I do think this is, I was thinking about this leading up to this session today. This language of adaptive leadership and looking at systems is in some ways less off-putting than some of the language people are using around some of the challenges we have these days. I know PCA America goes across all 50 states. I know a lot of you are probably working in incredibly complex and challenging political environments, some of which at least people are even afraid or reluctant to use certain terms because their funding will be on the line. You can use this approach to look at the reality of what families and communities need and get people, whatever their political persuasion might be, to have conversations about what the needs are. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I think you can use this approach to look systemically and try to figure out ways to work together. And you can be honest. This is something that folks at the Burns Institute taught me. If you have a group of people who are working about who can say what and who can't, and who can do what and who can't, and that's fine. Like, that's the type of open communication that I think we need to have, particularly in doing the types of things that are implied or very specific in the PCA America theory of change that I'm sure a lot of you are trying to figure out how to take and make more concrete at the local level. So that doesn't fully answer your question, but that's what it makes me think of, Takeem.
No, it is helpful though, because you're saying that you may not be able to address the whole thing. You got to maybe narrow in as a strategy. It's to focus in. Yeah.
The other thing is there's all kinds of other leadership work that you can do around teams. The 5 dysfunctions of a team is a book that a lot of people use. I've flipped that around, and you can turn those into healthy functions. In addition to thinking adaptively, if you've got a team working on things, you want that team to think about, what does it mean to operate effectively as a team? And that goes well with adaptive leadership, but I just couldn't find a way to bring that in together with this in this short period of time. But that's another piece that leaders can layer in around the way you operate, around the way you bring up and engage in some of this work. So I wanted to at least mention that before the end of the session today.
Are there other questions or reflections that folks have for Peter? Or things you're grappling with that you may want to share and get some insight on?
I was just looking at some of the chat.
Peter, I'm gonna ask this, and it may be really oversimplified, but I feel like it might be helpful. So if I am working on an adaptive challenge, am I automatically being an adaptive leader? Or are there specific philosophies of adaptive leadership that I need to keep in mind? You listed off some of the kind of big ideas that I need to keep in mind as I'm embracing this adaptive challenge. So wondering if, from your perspective, if there's sort of clarification on, am I automatically an adaptive leader if I'm doing it? And again, this is oversimplifying it, but if I'm embracing adaptive challenges versus technical challenges, or are there specific philosophies of the adaptive leadership approach that make me an adaptive leader?
I think it's more how you address any of the challenges, Jen. And I try not to even use the term adaptive leader. To me, it's for either exercising leadership or not, in order to address technical and adaptive challenges. And I'm not saying that just to play with the words. I think for me, it's always been a more helpful way to think of it. Am I considering what some of the challenges might be? Am I considering who needs to be involved in this? Or am I just so taken with how smart I am and how great my ideas are that I'm overlooking that? Which I think we all fall into that in different ways. We all think we have insight and we see something in a way others don't. And it's hard to always be open. And there are times, don't get me wrong, when we have to actually exercise our authority, if that's what we have, in order to move things forward. So I don't know if I answered the question. For me, the things that I focus on today, whether it's the way being at the table or thinking about who's talking now, that's the way I try to hold myself to at least acknowledging and being adaptive, and then exercising leadership when I need to. Whether I'm in meetings in Casey family programs where I am not high on the totem pole in terms of the authority that I have within Casey. That doesn't mean I can't exercise leadership with those people. That doesn't mean if I'm with the board of trustees in Casey that I couldn't exercise leadership by figuring out a way to engage with them in a different way than maybe might be expected. But sometimes I'm reluctant to do that because I'm afraid of what might happen, right? I'm afraid I might lose my standing or my reputation, and so I try to, at a minimum, be aware of that. The other thing I'd say is that someone got across to me once when I was doing this work. Whenever you say anything in a meeting or don't, you're actually making an intervention in the meeting. So how intentional are you about your interventions in the meeting? If you're not intentional about them, you should at least recognize them through those balcony moments, right? You should at least take a look at how you're showing up, or invite other people in the meeting to let you know how you're showing up. That to me is being adaptive as well, right? That's bringing these concepts to bear in terms of the way that I'm doing things. And I think it's safe to say, Kirsten and Jennifer and maybe some of the other folks, you've probably seen me in meetings we've been on around driving families safe for children, where I haven't been as adaptive as I could be, where I've retreated into my kind of conception of the way things are in a way, and I would say this to you in that context as well, but I appreciate it when people point that out when we try to have those conversations. Maybe that's one of the last lessons here. You really can't do this work alone. That's the other reason I resist, am I an adaptive leader or not, Jennifer? I don't think I can ever be an adaptive leader just on the face of it. I can't go into an organization and say, I'm adaptive and you're not, to everybody else. You know what I mean? It's bringing everybody along to looking at things maybe in a different way and somehow finding a way to engage them in the work in a different way. So I don't know if that's the best answer, but that's the way I think of it in response to that question.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I think, Ron Heifetz talks about this and others in the adaptive leadership approach. I mentioned it in the intro, is this movement from leadership as sort of an individual responsibility to the social sort of collective process. And I think, I think that's a really helpful thing to keep in mind, that it's not just me as a leader leading, but it's really engaging all partners in a collective approach. And I think that's a really helpful way to frame it. So thank you.
I mean, one exercise that people could do is to get together with a small group of 3 or 4 or even more. And even with just 15 minutes, you can do an exercise where, so if I were with Jennifer and Kirsten, well, my top line is Jennifer, Kirsten, Beth, Takeem. If I had a challenge and I wanted some feedback on it, I would present the challenge to all of you, lay it out quickly and say, this is the way I perceive the challenge. Then I would stop. You could do this in 15 or 20 minutes. So I get a few minutes. You all would have, 4 or 5 minutes to ask me clarifying questions, to make sure you clarify with me how I've described the challenge and what some of the elements are. And then if we were in person, I would have to turn my back to the rest of you and just sit there and listen to you as you spent 10 minutes talking about what you heard and what some of the issues are that I might not have been considering, or what some of the things are systemically that I might want to consider. And the goal for the 4 of you would not be to tell me how to solve the problem. In fact, you're really not allowed to do that. You're helping me diagnose the challenge. And it's a fascinating exercise. The adaptive leadership folks who go around and do trainings do that for an hour, where each person gets an hour. And the stuff you learn is fascinating, because you have these people who they might not even know what your job is, but just listening to them process what you laid out makes you realize, oh, there's so many other ways to look at this that I hadn't considered. And any of you could do that within your current organization, within your leadership team, or with colleagues, and get enormous amounts of insight that would help you think about some of your challenges in a different way. That's a simple way to do it. And if you want, I can lay that out at some point, or if people want to pursue that, we could try to do that in a different way at some point. So,
yeah, I love that. And I think it would be really helpful. I feel like when you have a problem that you're deep in, it's hard to see, it's hard to, like, what we do here is sort of zoom out and see all of or get up on the balcony and see all of the pieces.
Yep.
Have people share their perspectives. It brings in, alternative viewpoints and other things that you may not be considering. I love that exercise.
Yep.
So, we're getting here close to the end. And so, Peter, I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I'm going to close us up. And my question is not what you're probably expecting, but what keeps you up at night?
Currently.
Yes, currently.
I'll say actually 2 things, and these are both totally true. The thing with my dad, I did not invent. That keeps me up at night. There's stuff like that going on with my dad. So that's a real example. A work example, well, I guess I should practice what I preach. A work example that keeps me up at night is Thriving Families, Safer Children. Our struggles around partnering effectively with people who have lived experience and people in communities in order to do this work in a way that's effective. That actually does keep me up at night. I feel like and I'm going to say this, some people might take it the wrong way. We collectively, everyone who's involved in Thriving Families, including all my colleagues with lived experience and my colleagues at PCA and all the organizations, we collectively have not figured out how to solve's not the right word. We collectively need to figure out how to make more progress on that. That's the way I would put it. Yeah. And we get caught up too often in individual personalities and not looking at what systemically is going on that's preventing us as a group from doing what we need to do.
The bigger picture. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
So I can sit here and tell you that, but I should be applying it even more and raising that. So you should hold me to that.
Yeah. Well, and if anyone has any outsider insight, please do share that with Peter and us on Thriving Families. So I want to say thank you, Peter. Thanks so much for sharing that insightful information and the practical tips, and really how you sort of live this philosophy, right, of adaptive approach. I won't use leadership, but addressing adaptive challenges, and really how we can make that work a fundamental component of our approach. I want to thank all of you as well for joining us as we continue to learn and work together to build this idea of a primary prevention ecosystem in our country, one that ensures that all kids and families are living a purposeful and happy life with hope for the future. We also want to send our love and support to our colleagues and neighbors in the states that recently have been affected by the hurricane. Please, if you can, help the recovery efforts in those states. If you want to know how to help, please reach out to the American Red Cross, the United Way. Contact our state chapters in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, Virginia. All of those who are affected our chapters are working really hard with their communities and their neighbors to rebuild and recover. So sending our love to all of you. Please join us for our special Zooming Out speaker series session in partnership with Annie E. Casey Foundation. That next one will be on October 30th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll be joined by Chelsea Miller, who led the Freedom March, New York City. She was also just yesterday, I think, I saw on her Instagram, recently selected as one of the inaugural list of democracy heroes in our country, recognizing those who are trailblazers, advocates, organizers, and change makers. You won't want to miss that this exciting session. And I believe Kirsten put the registration link in the chat. So please do join us. Thank you for staying until the end. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thank you all.